Yiladikeyo, Yiladikekeliahen. 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 Hello, I have now completed week 3 in trying to become more conversant in Hindi. Let's see how I did this week. As I create the output, I'm learning more of the language as I go along. I don't know every single word in there, which feels odd to me. I feel strange making sentences that aren't completely making sense to me altogether. And I know some of the words along the way there, not all of them. But I'm going along with the idea that I actually did a TED Talk about this idea in regards to bias, trying to get rid of our biases and so on. The idea is that the output is more important than the input. Learning things, reading things, listening to things, and taking things in is not as important, or even processing them inside of the brain is not as important as creating things, either writing them or speaking them. So I am going along with my own my own theory. Behaviors are important. Behaviors are where it's at. So one example of that is my son Carter. Carter loves the German language and really wants to learn German. So we took him to German camp one year. And we didn't realize this, but before you go to German camp, you actually are supposed to know a few words of German. You're supposed to know some words in German. He really didn't know any at all because I hadn't taken the time to teach him. I mean, I don't actually know German, so it wouldn't have been helpful for me, but I didn't take the time to look up some videos or to enroll him in any courses. I kind of thought that's why he went to camp. But anyway, so we showed up at camp, dropped him off for a week of German camp, and immediately I sort of just wanted to drive him away because immediately we went to this registration desk and everyone was speaking to us only in German, and my heart just went out to him. I could see just the fear in his eyes. He didn't know anything that they were saying at all, not the first word. At the end of the week, he still learned very little German, in my opinion.
I'm tanzen. I'm drinking. I'm essen. I'm swimming. What else? Oh, I'm lesen. I'm scribing.
How do you say hello, how are you?
I don't know how to say how are you. I don't know how to say hello.
Hello is hello?
Yeah, hello.
Because what was happening the entire time was that he was embedded in what seemed to be sort of like a small German village. Really cool in that way. He definitely learned some German foods and drinks, and he learned about the euro. And he was around people speaking German all the time, but the problem was he was only taking it in. He wasn't producing a lot. He was only hearing, listening. He would participate in songs, probably singing very quietly, and he wasn't producing words. At the end of that week, we were a little disappointed in the experience because he hadn't really learned a lot of German, but I put that on the idea that he was not speaking a lot of German. There was a lot of German around him. He was definitely taking it in. He was probably processing it, but he wasn't actually putting much out in the way of German culture or German language. Maybe someday he'll go back. I don't know. The strongest language that I have learned up until this point would definitely be French. I have 2 parents who are bilingual. I have taken many classes. I've taken about 6 years of French through high school and college. I was exposed to France. We traveled around France. I was surrounded by a lot of French, but I didn't actually force myself to speak a lot of French. This is really difficult for a child to think about producing a language when you're just learning how to take it in. I remember once we were in a tiny little town in France called Meung-sur-Loire, and we were visiting a friend of my father's in France, and he was a high school teacher. So in my high school class in America, we started developing a relationship with this guy's high school English class in France. Kind of cool, right? So my French class in America, his English speaking class in France. And so we started having pen pals, and we started, some of us corresponded with pen pals. It was a really cool little exchange there. And I had a pen pal, and I'd been writing to her, and she would write back. I think I wrote to her only in English, and then she would write back to me in English. So she was getting practice on her end. I wasn't getting any practice, as I recall. Anyway, we were visiting this guy, and he called up his student, And he said, why don't you talk to her? And I was just completely intimidated. I was very shy. I really hadn't spoken that much French at all. And I was talking to her on the phone. I may have said a few words of French, like oui and no and merci. The standard things I'd always said, just words of politeness. And I think she lived in the same town. She lived close by, so we went to visit her. And again, I was so desperately shy. Here's this entire family. I'm sure they didn't mean to, but they were kind of staring at me and sort of waiting for me to say some French. So I thought in my mind, I'd actually planned this ahead of time. I'm like, I'm going to say one French sentence. And I said to them, as-tu un chien, which is, do you have a dog? And I was actually thinking, do I say avez-vous un chien, which is the formal version of do you have a dog, or do I say as-tu un chien? And I think I said as-tu un chien. And they were all delighted. They were delighted that I actually said something. But as I recall, that was pretty much the only thing I said. I planned it out like tiny little 4-word sentence. This has not been a successful way to learn French. As much exposure as I've had to French through the years, I can't speak a word and I can't really understand it either. I've been watching some YouTube videos where they do these interviews of people on the street, and I'm thinking to myself, I know every single word that they're saying. I know every single word in that sentence, but I can't hear it and I can't produce it. I can't really put together the phrases that they're saying. So this is a main reason why I am approaching the learning of Hindi very differently. I'm producing it. I'm forcing myself, and it's very uncomfortable. I will say it's very uncomfortable. I'm forcing myself to say sentences that I don't even really know what they are, but I have to force myself to do this on a daily basis. This week I decided that I was going to watch some YouTube videos and watch some interactions and memorize the entire interaction. And one of the YouTubers that I watch is Carl Rock. He lives in Delhi. He's a New Zealander, so he originally spoke English, and now he lives in India. So his version of Hindi is more comfortable to me because he's an English speaker learning the language. He lives in Delhi full time. And there was a video where he's walking around Delhi with his brother. A woman comes up to Carl and starts asking him if he wants to buy some necklaces. Now, a few things about this video. The very first time I actually watched this interaction was years ago when I was just kind of starting to get into this before I even really thought about starting to learn Hindi. I was watching this video and I was amazed at how much he spoke Hindi. I didn't know anything about him at the time. This may have actually been the first video that I watched of his. Now that I go back, the magic of it is that now that I go back, the very first time I re-listened to this recently, I was able to pick out some words, which was really cool. I loved that, first of all. When I listened to this conversation, I listened to it at 0.75 speed, and that was slow enough that I was able to pick up pretty much everything that they were saying. And Carl very nicely did a narrative in English so that I was able to follow along. Now, when I was doing the transcription of this for myself, I had to look up some words because I didn't understand everything that they were saying. There were some sentences that they would add something onto the end that I couldn't really understand. So I'm not sure if that was supposed to be part of the sentence or just something that they added on that is a standard thing to add on to the end of the sentence, like we might say a, or what do you think about that? Or I don't know exactly, but some sort of an ending on the sentence that was not completely clear to me. In this interaction, there was a greeting in there that I have not come across in the books. Like in the classroom learning that I've done of Hindi, there is not this particular greeting, but it seems to be something that seemed really natural to both of them. He greets her and she responds in a way very quickly that makes it clear that this is actually the way that some people greet each other in India. In this video, once again, I'm cursed by nahin. Nahin. It's pronounced a different way than I've heard it in the past. This interaction seems to be a pretty friendly interaction for the most part. In part of this, about halfway through the conversation, they start calling each other affectionately by names like brother and sister, which is one of the most endearing things. My husband and I, on our first trip to India, we were at the Red Fort in Delhi, and a little girl, probably 12 years old, came up to me and she said, "Can I have a picture with you, Auntie?" Isn't that the most darling thing? Assuming a friendly relationship with somebody is the sweetest thing. I love it. So he calls her Beedi, which means sister. She calls him Bhai, which means brother. You'll also notice that there is a little bit of mixture of Hindi and English, which is pretty standard as well. Most of the interaction is in Hindi, but especially when it comes to the words of transaction, the numbers of transaction, there seems to be sort of a mix of Hindi and English there. क्या हाल? सभी के? आप कहाँ से हैं? राजस्थान से. Oh, राजस्थान से. अच्छा. Rajasthan बहुत सुंदर है, ना? By my necklaces, I couldn't really understand everything she was saying there. ये नाइन चाहिए है. क्यों? क्योंकि मैं आदमी हूँ. ये लड़की के लिए है. बहुत सुंदर है. Ah, बहुत सुंदर है. X off of 4 है. And there's some other things I don't understand. बीड़ी नहीं चाहिए है. Bayi 5 100. नहीं नहीं चाहिए है. Okay, bayi. 10 rupiah 3 kyo. No thank you. Abi nain. Bikab. Many nain chahiye. Bula? Nain chahiye. Han. Samajh gaya? Samajh gaya. Kya ko Hindi? I'm editing this right now. It's pretty embarrassing. I'm not gonna lie. If nothing else, someday I'll look back and say, boy, those pronunciations were terrible, because I will be so much better at speaking Hindi then, right? I learned some new words, and more importantly, I learned some general ways that people actually interact. So it'll be worth it, right? It'll be worth it. See you next week.